Namaste, everyone, and welcome to our, I guess this is session number 6, if I remember correctly, 6 or 7. And we will go a little deeper into Indian sculpture today. And to help us do that, we have Dr. Pranjal Garg with us. Let me first introduce him briefly, and then we'll hear what he has to share about the Indian art, form, and spirit, with a special focus on Indian sculpture in the light of Sri Aurobindo's writings on Indian art and culture. So Dr. Pranjal Garg is an ex-student from Sri Aurobindo International Center of Education, popularly known as the Ashram School, Ashram Higher Course, after which he went on to do his master's in ancient Indian history, culture, and archaeology from Punjab University, Chandigarh, and then he did his doctorate in archaeology as well. He has several years of experience of teaching at various universities, and currently he is teaching at the Department of History at Central University of Tami Nadu, Thiruvarur. He's been deeply inspired by this text, The Foundations of Indian Culture, and also particularly his writings on the Veda and the human cycle as well. And right from his undergraduate years, he's been doing research on the symbolic aspects of Vedic Yagna, as explained by Sri Aurobindo in his essays on the Vedas and hymns to mystic fire. So he has been published in Ashram Journal as well, called the Mother India. And his interests kind of span over in ancient Indian culture, classical archaeology and archaeological sciences, Vedic Indian philosophy and symbolism, itihasas, and other such aspects of ancient Indian history. So naturally, Indian art, particularly Indian sculpture, fits rightly into his area of interest because as Sri Aurobindo writes in his classic essay on Indian sculpture, that the ancient Indian sculpture tried to express what the Upanishads, Vedas, and the itihasas tried to express through their philosophical explanations and legends and stories. And Sri Aurobindo is also, has said this amazing, given us this amazing idea of how the gods that are depicted in Indian sculptures are truly the embodiments of real beings. They are cosmic beings. They are not just the sculptor's imagination. So to help us go a little deeper into the Indian art of sculpture, also in some brief comparison with the Western understanding of sculpture, I invite Dr. Pranjal Garg to take us through that journey. So it's all yours, Pranjal. Welcome.
Thank you for giving me this opportunity, and I'm very happy that I can bring this perspective of Indian art with a comparative of how the West looks at art in comparison with India. So document is not shared. Let me share my document. Is it visible?
Yes, please go ahead.
So I'll look at Indian art, particularly the sculpture, and we'll discuss how the form and spirit play their dynamics in the entire Indian art, particularly the sculpture. And also I will, because I belong to the history background, I will try to bring through some of the historical aspects as well as make a comparative of Indian art, that is the East, with European art, that is the West. And that is something that stays in contrast throughout the book, The Renaissance in India. And Chindo highlights that again and again, that how the two worlds, how the two poles look at art from different perspectives, where form is prominent or the spirit is prominent. So let me start my presentation with what Chindo tells us. And as we know that there are several complaints by Mr. Archer in this book about how Indian art does not fulfill the basic criteria of art. Sometimes it does not live up to what art is expected in a culture, in a civilization. So This is where Shivendra says that that is the complaint of the want of naturalism in most Indian culture, because realism is something that is almost completely missing in Indian art. Realism was never given so much of emphasis. It was so realism is something that is connecting to the form, to the outer terrestrial form, and it was always the spirit, whether it was in literature, whether it was in various art forms, whether it is performing arts, painting, sculpture, even architecture. It is the spirit behind that was the most important, and that was the essential fulfillment of taking up the task of making a sculpture, making a temple, or creating a painting. He further goes to say the inspiration, the way of seeking is frankly not naturalistic. Not, that is to say, the vivid, the convincing, and accurate, the great, graceful, beautiful, or strong, or even the idealized or imaginative imagination of surface or terrestrial nature. Of course, that remains the entire allegation. And when it comes to Indian art, when it comes to sculpture particularly, Shilda says that, I quote, when we so look at it, we shall be able to see that the sculpture of ancient and medieval India claims its place on the very highest levels of artistic achievement. I do not know where we shall find a sculpture art of a more profound intention, a greater spirit, a more consistent skill of achievement. So it becomes most evident even when you look at the Indian art, when you look at the sculpture, when you look at the various panels through the centuries. It's not simply a given small period in time. Like when we look at, I'll show you some examples of, we'll go through an entire journey of pictures of various culture of West and of India. When we look at West, there is the Greco-Roman time, when the entire sculpture of a very aesthetic prominence came up in West. And after that, there was a sort of decadence where not much of sculpture was given importance, but some paintings, mosaics were there in the Middle Ages. Then again, there was a revival, which is the Renaissance period, which we call in Europe. And that's when it was a revival of the antiquity of the Greco-Roman art, in which the very essence of recreating the form in its utmost perfection was taken up. So when we look at that, in contrast to Indian art, we see that there's a very strong contrast of emphasizing only on spirit, and form is just a medium to express that spirit, to be able to cover the multiple terrestrial aspects, to give that experience, the tangible experience of the spirit through the terrestrial world. I start this photo journey with a sculpture of Sri Rama. It's called Kodanda Rama, and this is the sculpture in bronze, Chola bronzes. Just so that we don't understand that he's holding a veena or something, it is the bow. Kodanda means the bow that he's holding, and it is very surprising. It is almost a little corrupting for a Western eye, especially it has been earlier when the colonizers had come in and they looked at the sculpture in India. They did not feel that there was enough aesthetics in Indian art, because somebody who is supposed to be so manly, somebody who's the Purushottama, somebody who is the bravest of brave, fierce in war and battle, somebody uh, who had been victorious over the greatest warrior, that is Ravana, could be sculpted in a way that was not so manly as we see men around in the world in the form. So that is where the whole confusion starts when people perceive art, that why is there no stark difference in the way a man is portrayed as compared to a woman that is portrayed. And here is Sri Rama standing in Tribhangama pose and holding a bow. When you see an archer holding a bow, you'll see him as a very strong, brave, fierce person who should be, uh, who should portray, or who should emanate only bravery from him. But here there is a sense of, more than bravery. Bravery can be reflected through both. Bravery could be reflected by the telltales that are woven around the personality. But the most important thing, the most important aspect, characteristic of that personality is the Saumya Rupa of the person. And that is the true spirit of the person. That is the true essence of that person, that he is benevolent. He is willing to pardon everyone. Even the enemies can be pardoned. And that must reflect through the form. Somehow that should become the most prominent characteristic of the form. I'll go forward. Again, I quote, because these ancient civilizations had taken the entire art to another level right in the beginning when the civilizations had started. So Shivinda says the art of sculpture has indeed flourished supremely only in ancient countries, where it was conceived against its natural background and support a great architecture. Egypt, Greece, India take the premier rank in this kind of creation. And we know the kind of sculpture we have in Egypt, in Greece, and in India. We start some examples of how, again, I have tried to make a comparative according to how I perceive. It's more a personalized perspective. Again, it's not something that, it must be understood that emphasizing on a prominence of form is not lowering the art. That is how they have perceived. But the mindset, the whole ethos in Asiatic countries, primarily in India, the spirit has taken the place in front. That has been the guiding force. That has been the most prominent aspect of taking up art at all. So this is from the Renaissance period. Perseus finally managed to kill Medusa. Is finally, and his bare strength reflects so prominently in this sculpture that you cannot miss it. So the even Shrivananda says that in form, the way they have excelled in Europe, particularly in the time of Renaissance, is beyond any age, any aesthetics of art that could ever achieve the perfection in form in the terrestrial realm. And then you have, again, I'm taking the theme of the picture of the Western and Indian context. You have Gaja Samhara Shiva, where he's killing the Gajasur. And if you see the two photos, there is, even if this is something of destruction, even if this relates to something of victory, it is not something that the sculptor feels that it should not yet produce an effect of vibhatsa, the various rasas, the navarasas. So vibhatsa was a form, was a rasa that was very delicately combined with sculpture or paintings, because vibhatsa cannot be something that should create an ambience of cruelty. It's finally not for the sake of violence that it was done. It is for the victory of dharma. It is for the victory of the good over the bad, over the evil, over the hostile. So it is a moment of joy again at the same time, that even the person who has been uh, killed, even the asura that has been killed, the asura is also humble at the last moment. The same thing happens for Ravana also. He is humbled that he is finally worthy of being killed by Sri Rama. So it is not something that should reflect or create an ambience of violence, of brutality, but it should reflect in the end a moment of joy, a moment of victory, a moment of truth taking over falsehood. So the inspiration, I quote from Sriaurobindu, the inspiration, the way of seeing is frankly not naturalistic in the Indian context. Not, that is to say, the vivid, convincing and accurate, the graceful, beautiful and strong, or even the idealized or imaginative imagination of surface or terrestrial nature. That is what we had seen earlier. And with this, we can again see how naturalism is not essential to provoke those rasas in the viewer. This is the very famous Pieta by Michelangelo, again of Renaissance period, where the mother of Christ is holding the body of Christ once it has been brought down from the cross. And of course, there can be no greater perfection of execution of the form except in Pieta. I mean, I have talked to Bilu this so many times that this is one of the most marvelous sculptures that I have ever seen in photograph yet. But the way she's holding Christ, the way there is a very sober sorrow and grief on her face. She's not lamenting, she's not crying. So somewhere it has, yes, caught the very spirit of the greatness of the entire event, because it was not just a sad event, it was a great event. Crucifixion of Christ is a great event. We read that in Thoughts and Aphorisms also. And somewhere Michelangelo probably was more receptive than many other people, where he would, of course, bring the perfection in the form, but spirit was also somewhere lingering around, not too far back. And then I have another photograph of sarcophagus in Pisa, and this was probably the inspiration for the beginning of the Italian Renaissance sculpture in 13th century, they say. And in particular, the Fedra sarcophagus was the model for Niccolo Pisano's animalistic scenes on the pulpit of the cathedral. We'll come to the pulpit later on. So here is again a scene that is of mourning, that is of grief, where somebody has passed. Sarcophagus is like a mummified box. It's like a coffin of stone. And then we have another context of passing away, the Mahaparinirvana of Buddha. This is from the cave number 26 of Ajanta. And the panel below, Buddha, they are sorrowful. They feel that the one who was to lead is not with us. But of course, at the same time, the expression you see on Buddha's face, the expression you see on the devotee's face, it is all reflecting a sort of love, a sort of feeling of being blessed, that he did not just go away. He blessed us. He showed us the path, and he will live through this path with us. And if you just come back to this, we see that somewhere to achieve a greater perfection, to create a more sorrowful feeling, sentiment in the viewer, it feels as if, I mean, of course, it is Christ is lifeless here, but he makes it very evident that it is lifeless. The slackening of the body, the drop down of the hand. While when we see Buddha, we don't. The first view of it does not give us a feeling of Mahaparinirvana. It does not have any slackening. It does not have. It is that the person is not the body. The person is the spirit, the soul behind. And like Gita says that Nenam Chindanti Shastrani Nenam Dahati Pavakana Chainam Kalindayantako Nashoshati Marute, that spirit will never die. And the body must in that case represent that undying spirit, that spirit that is eternal, and which is why even in spite of Mahaparinirvana, he looks eternal, he looks still alive, he looks as if he has just gone into a sleep, a deep slumber, maybe something from where he will wake up. And although that was the case with Christ also, but that is how Michelangelo chose to represent him, as if the light has gone out completely. Then Chandra says the greatness and continuity of Indian sculpture is due to the close connection between the religious and philosophical and the aesthetic mind of the people. This becomes very important because the way we are seeing history today, of course, we cut asunder religious history. Philosophy is definitely not part of history. That is like a taboo if you talk about philosophy in history. And then aesthetic mind, that is again to do with fine arts and doesn't directly correlate with the art history as such. But when you look at Indian sculpture, the three, the religious, philosophical, and aesthetic mind, were all so closely connected that you cannot cut aside these things. The religion, say, like all of the sculpture, there is a philosophy behind that sculpture. There is a religion that has been created to that sculpture. There is an aesthetic mind again behind that sculpture. And because there was this amalgamation of all three together, it attained a greatness. It attained a greatness that lasted forever, that need not have a revival because it never died out. It could not die out. One of the three kept it alive, and thus there was a continuity. So its survival into times not far from us was possible because of the survival of the caste of the antique mind in that philosophy and religion, a mind familiar with eternal things, capable of cosmic vision, having its roots of thought and seeing in the profundities of the soul, in the most intimate, pregnant, and abiding experiences of the human spirit. And this was enough to keep it alive. This was enough to keep it going. It was not a tradition that had to be kept alive because we want to conserve a heritage. It was simply something that inspired people, and thus people executed it. This is just a narrative orbit panel at the party because a lot of the times there is this also allegation that the coronation in things are empty. When you see a panel in Indian sculpture, it's empty. It has just one or two things. Sculpture as such is just one. You have Chola bronzes, you have a lot of these statues in the Garbhagriha. It's just one statue. While when you look at the Western statues as such, you'll find a panel usually. You'll find, a lot of pillars in it. So that was not something that was missing. This is, modern period, around more than 2.25 millennium past. Then Shivendra says, the spirit of this greatness is indeed at the opposite pole to the perfection within limits. The elusive nobility or the vital fineness and physical grace of Hellenistic creation in stone. So if you look at just the perfection that was achieved by Hellenistic, that is the Greek civilization, the Indian sculpture is in contrast to it. It's almost in opposition to it. But in contrast, in the sense that it had a perfection without limits. It had reached a point where it need not be restricted with the lines, be restricted with form, be restricted with the way that this is how it must be done. This is how we see it in real. That is why this is how it must be reflected in the sculpture also. There was this freedom to execute your faith, your sentiment, your expression, your aesthetics through the sculpture in the way you personalized manner want it. And we'll see in the end a lot of such, I have taken one theme, say Nataraja, and taken many sculptures, and how there have been multiple variety of executions in that. And he goes further to tell us, Shrivendu, the Indian mind moves on the spur of a spiritual sensitiveness and psychic curiosity, while the aesthetic curiosity of the European temperament is intellectual, vital, emotional, and imaginative in that sense. And almost the whole strangeness of Indian use of line and mass, ornament and proportion, and rhythm arises from this very difference. So this will remain a very prominent theme between the comparison of the European sculpture and the Indian sculpture. Here is another masterpiece by Michelangelo, David. Somebody who's victorious, somebody who's proud, somebody who's uh, brave, who could dare, somebody who could take up a challenge. And that reflects very clearly in the sculpture. I mean, there can be no doubt, if you know the story behind, you will have every word of that story reflecting through every vein and muscle, and the very posture, the way he holds himself, it reflects the entire story. And then you have another standing figure. I just took another standing figure. You have Buddha, who has taken up again a challenge to efface suffering from humanity, take away that suffering, find the cause of that suffering, and find a way with which we can go beyond that suffering. And here he stands. This again reflects all that he has achieved. Again, it reflects all that he has given to the world, what he has become by himself. We see no characteristic of his royal nature here. We see only the characteristic of all of his achievement after he had left the royal position, after he had taken up the life of a sannyasi and found the way to the nirvana. This is Mathura art. Shrivendu says the sculptor must express always in static form the idea of the spirit. Uh, the idea of the spirit is cut out for him in mass and line, significant in the stability of its insistence. For him, eternity seizes hold of time in its shapes and arrests it in the monumental spirit of stone and bronze. Here we have another example, Moses with his commandments. Michelangelo has executed him so brilliantly. The stature of a man who is a leader, a man who's confident that he's being guided, a man who knows the way and who's going to lead, who can see far off. The very way he's looking into the future, that this is where I must take my people, this is where I must reach, this is where I have been guided towards, and it has been executed. And then you have another leader who knows where he has to lead people, who's found the path by himself. He need not have any guidance, and he can lead now. And that person, he knows his truth, and he knows the truth. And the execution of this personality does not need those details of form, does not need those details of the terrestrial exertion that he has taken up and he will have to take up. It does not need that. At the same time, we do have, this is all Mathura art, we have a Gandhara art also, which is like an amalgamation of Hellenistic, that is Greek, and Indian art that flourished around the region of Pakistan and Afghanistan in first, second century BC to first, second century AD. And very soon after that, Mathura art started. In the Gandhara art, we see a very clear-cut depiction of Indian themes put into the mold of the Western naturalistic perfection. So we'll come to that also. We have one example of that later on. And then here we have Christ and Saint Thomas. It's again Renaissance period by Viragio. And what I want to show here is how Christ is commanding, how Christ is leading, how Christ is telling him what to do, how to be, how he has to take the whole message forward to the people. And at the same time, we have in Gangai Kondi Cholapuram the Chandesha Nugraha Murti, where again there is a disciple, there is a God, there is a commandment, there is this message, and how the disciple is receiving it here, in contrast to how the disciple is receiving it. Here we can even see a very strong play of lines, positioning, the proportions, the ratios, Shiva, Parvati, Chandesha, where he is positioned, where Shiva is positioned, uh, through what through what action, through what activity he is being blessed. You know, there's a garland that is being tied around his head. So there is something, you know, the head again, you know, if you go into the symbolism behind head, something that reflects mind, through which the knowledge is gained and the knowledge is being transferred, flowers in the most beautiful manner. I mean, there can be multiple interpretations to all of this, of course, but intellect, beauty put together in the most aesthetic sense, and being blessed with that. And you have, I'll go back to the previous one, you have somebody who's taking the knowledge, who's taking the reins of leadership now, St. Thomas, who will propagate Christianity now to the world, will bring the message of love, of what Christ stood for to the people. So there's a whole contrast of how form is used to bring out the whole theme, and sometimes even the theme can be grasped with the positioning, with the lines, with the spirit that is clearly reflected. The whole message sometimes can be reflected through the lines, through the form. Another very interesting sculpture. This is in wood. This is Penitent Magdalene, and that was Mary Magdalene, who was a prostitute, and then later on went around wandering, repenting in the desert for 30 years. This is made in wood, again of the Renaissance period. It's by Donatella. You have here, you know, like it says, emancipated figure. You know, how everything is lost through repentance. Repentance is like a punishment. Repentance is like uh, a thing that will take away everything from you except life. You're still alive somewhere and repenting. I mean, you're at the borderline where you wish you could pass away, but you are not allowed to. You are meant to still repent for all those deeds that you have done. And then at the same time, again, this is more of Gandharan art. Austerities of Bodhisattva in schist of Gandhara period is in the Central Museum of Lahore. Again, the theme is slightly different. It's not about repenting, but it is still about taking all the suffering on yourself. You know, repenting again. Mary Magdalene is taking all the suffering on herself for what she has done. You know, and here he's taking upon himself the suffering for not what he has done, but so that humanity may not suffer, so that the humanity may one day be relieved from all the suffering that it has been going through and will continue to go through otherwise, if Buddha does not take all the suffering upon himself. So here, of course, a more detailed, a more Hellenistic reflection of forms and lines is executed, but still, Understanding the theme, the forms are reflecting something of a greater vastness of a larger humanity, of a larger vision within that sculpture, as compared to an individual as Mary Magdalene, who's repenting and repenting only for her own suffering. So this is the uh, panel that I talked about earlier, that pulpit, and it's a nativity panel of Christ, and this was again a very important panel. It is very significant that it was completed in the year 1260, right at the beginning of Renaissance, and that is the date used by most art historians to mark the beginning of Renaissance. And this is where somewhere Renaissance had taken its inspirations from. And so this is about nativity of Christ, and here we have the nativity of Buddha. He's born, and the 7 steps in which he's born, and it's in schist, again Gandharan style. The form has an execution of the Hellenistic influence. It's in the Indian Museum, Calcutta, and of 3rd-4th century. Gandharan art did continue for a little longer alongside Mathura School of Art, even in 3rd-4th century. But again, the way things are reflected, the way people are looking at Buddha, the way it's all executed, this is almost 1,000 years earlier than the nativity pulpit of Christ that we see here at the beginning of the Renaissance. And we see that execution is fairly advanced, if not equal. Of course, a lot of the credit goes to the Hellenistic influence. Nonetheless, the very theme has a lot of positioning, which is very interesting, which was not, if you see only Hellenistic sculpture and panels of bas-relief, you don't have that reflection of usage of positioning so much. If you see in this one, again, positioning has come up in the Renaissance period. A lot of people say, the influence is coming from India to West or West to India. That's an entire controversy. But again, the whole system of positioning existed so well in the form, and then of course the whole spirit behind it, the whole rejoicing movement that we have here. Another very important sculpture that we have in Madhya Pradesh, in Vidisha, of Varaha Avatar. Again, something that is stupendous, something that saved the earth. It's almost like coming back to life from death. Earth was lost, and here we have finally somewhat an execution which is more muscular in form, more Hellenistic, probably because Hellenistic influence of Gandharan art was already there. But of course, this is more of Mathura sculpture. But yet, they wanted to reflect that this was the great, strong Varaha avatar, which would fight and bring back Earth. Earth, the huge, stupendously gigantic planet, had to be brought back, and Earth is sitting on the shoulder of Varaha here, right below his mouth. Because Earth is so big, Varaha had to be shown bigger because he saved the Earth. Because Earth is so big, Varaha had to be shown stupendous, like a giant, like a Herculean person who could save the Earth, who had that strength. Again, the strength is shown in bulk, in a mass, not in the refined, so that the eye of the perceptor does not go into the refined lines, does not go into the folds, into the bulges of the muscle, but that the person viewing should get an idea that it was such an enormous entity, an enormous energy, an enormous personality that had saved the earth and brought it back and put it in it at its place. Which is why we have the magnanimity of the sculpture as so big. It is almost, I think, twice the size of a human figure. And the position of Varaha here, like we've seen in David and Moses and other, you have this sense of victoriousness. You have this sense of winning back the earth, bringing it back, and the way he's kept his hand on the girdle, on the waist, it reflects that this is definitely a proud moment, not just for himself, for earth, for humanity, for dharma. It reflects so many other things than just a victory. Shivindu says to appreciate our own artistic past at its right value, we have to free ourselves from all subjection to foreign outlook and see our sculpture and painting, as I have already suggested about our architecture, in the light of its own profound intention and greatness of spirit. So here we have Shiva. Again, Shiva, a wonderful personality that has been uh, created to charm people. It is it is a god that can reflect all the Navarasas. It is a god with whom the Ganas, the Bhutas, the Pretas live happily, rejoice in everything that he has. He is the one who can afford everything, but yet chooses to not afford everything. He is the one who is the great sannyasi, yet at the same time, he is a person of grihastha. He is a person who has a right, who has a Nandi. Here, of course, the Nandi is missing, but who has a Nandi, who has a right, but right which is not glorious, which is not royal, which belongs to, if you see from that perspective, Garuda, who is the ride of vehicle of Vishnu, or Hansa, the vehicle of Saraswati, and other such vehicles are glorious, glamorous, royal. Here is taken the vehicle which is the most uh, banal, which is the most grounded, which is used to till the earth. That is the Nandi, the bull, the Rishabha. Again, both going at the same time together. Rishabha, something that is earliest from the point of view of human evolution, it is earliest, something that was right at the beginning with the humans when they started agriculture. And he has a family. He has Parvati, he has Ganesha, he has in his family Kartikeya. He is definitely a symbol of everything. He is the Adi, he is the Anta, he is the Kala, and that everything, that uh, that bundle of everything, that package of everything, is what is reflected in all his sculptures. Because he can be everything. Uh, he can he can be the destroyer. Yet he creates also. He can drink the garal. He can drink the poison to save humanity. So he is also the savior. He is not just the destroyer. So there is just so many facets to his personality that his the variety of his sculptures can be, you know, have such a plethora, such a wide range that you can just keep uh, admiring him more and more. And just at the same time, when he is the destroyer, he is one who is connected with death. He is also a dancer, the dancer who creates, the dancer who destroys. With his dance, he can create and destroy. So he has got the aesthetics. While he is the one who had danced with the dead body of his very wife. He danced with the death. So the multifaceted personality that Shiva has, it reflects in all the variety of sculpture that can and that has been created to depict him. He is the sannyasi. He comes in various forms to earth, to people, and the thing is that when you see, very rarely you'll see Rama in Tribhangima, very rarely you'll see Krishna in Tribhangima. But Shiva is there in Tribhangima because he's the dancer as well as aesthetic, as well as a sannyasi. So there is a very strange yet very beautiful combination that his personality enjoys through sculpture. Again, Shiva with Nandi, where Nandi is missing. Shiva as Tripurantaka. Again in Tribhangima, he has this charm that reflects through Tribhangima so often. All the Chola bronzes, you'll never see Shiva standing straight. Vishnu will stand straight like a rod sometimes. Surya will stand straight like a rod. He will always emanate a sense of beauty, a sense of sobriety, a sense of aesthetics. It creates a rasa, it creates a melange of navarasas in you when you look at the sculpture of Shiva. Again, another Shiva is Tripurantaka. The slender waist, does no definition of muscles, yet he's the strongest person. When you want to say Tripurantaka, he's a destroyer, and by no means any Western eye could say that this could be a person who's destroying something or who has just destroyed something. Shiva, so this is the Nataraja series. Again, what I want you to look at is how Nataraja can be reflected in multiple ways. The hairdo is different. So the form is used. The form has so much variation. The form has so many lines. I'll come to lines in one or two pictures. And the way of course, hairdo is one way that you can use freely the lines. The hair spread across this way in Nataraja, the hair tied behind, like in this Nataraja form. And of course, the whole position, it has such a fine balance in form, yet not emphasizing on the form, reflecting the entire spirit of Nataraja, of the king of the dance, uh, the king of everything, the one who has time in his control, the one who has everything in his control, and the self in his control. You have another Nataraja. So this entire circle of flames give a very grandiose feeling to the viewer. And if you see the headdress is very simple in this form. And if you can see this background Nataraja, you have the hair spread out. So Nataraja again, uh, it can be a very happy dance. It need not always be something that is destroying. And this is a very simplistic sculpture as compared to what you have before, a little more ornate. So you have this freedom for the sculptor to use lines to his will, what he feels, how he can experience Shiva. That is how he reflects it. And there's also this sense of, not in bronze, but in stone, there's this sense of that the sculptor is to meditate upon that block of stone and communicate with it and almost ask the stone, what kind of execution do you want? Whether you want to be executed as a male or a female, whether you want to be executed as a power that is chanchala in its nature, or that is strong and fierce. So the sculptor was so deeply connected with his stone. That is something that we reflect. That is reflected in Michelangelo also, because when he had to carve that David, he spent days trying to understand that block of marble. He had to fight for it initially, of course, with Leonardo da Vinci, and finally he spent days to understand, to reflect, to probably meditate upon that entire block. And here you have another Nataraja with a very fine sense of using of lines, the hair spread this way across on both sides of the head, and a very fine balance of symmetry and asymmetry, yet giving prominence to the spirit uh, in the execution. Again, Ardhanareshwara, one of the finest sculptures that reflects only spirit, yet uses form in its execution, a fine combination of where religion, philosophy, and aesthetics come together, take a shape, and goes beyond any norms of the society, yet keeping all the norms. That is something that is beauty of Indian culture, Indian philosophy rather, that there is there's the opposite duality that can come together. Good and bad can be in the same sculpture. You have the Asura and Nataraja in the same sculpture. You have the male and female in the same sculpture. And that is how, I mean, that is somewhere, that is what reflects of the Vedic concepts of Brahman. Because whenever the rishis of the Vedas had to describe Brahman, they always describe Brahman in opposites. That it moves not. It is inside and it is outside. Tadejati, Tannejati, Tadure, Tadvantike, Tadantarasya Sarvasya, Tadu Sarvasyasya Bhayata. This is from Ishopanishad. It is taken from Yajurveda. And it's a very fine lines. I mean, this is prose culture, I would say. This is what it is. When you read Upanishads, when you read Veda, and the way they describe Brahman, it goes beyond your imagination. Of course, you cannot, with a very mental conception, you cannot try to understand it. But it creates uh, a sculpture with words, with ideas, with concepts, and that is where, after some time, it starts reflecting into the sculpture also. That the entire spirit is not just exclusive. It has multiple aspects. It has a lot of inclusivity. It has everything in one sculpture, that it can reflect the entire world. It can reflect the entire cosmos. When you have Natarajan with that ring of fire around, it's the entire cosmos that the Nataraja is uh, governing, that the Nataraja is handling with his dance. So I end my talk here. If there are any questions, we can take it up. Thank you.
Thank you, Pranjal. You really took us to this really massive, intense journey through various examples. And I think with the idea that we started with, that, gods of Indian sculpture are cosmic beings, embodiments of that greatest spirit, that intention, that really came alive through the examples that you shared. And the brief comparisons that you made, emphasizing the form and spirit, the value or the emphasis given to both, or to either in two different traditions. That was very enlightening. Thank you so much. I invite anyone else if they have any comment or question or thought to share.
I think, Pranjal, I really, wonderful to see this kind of presentation. It's a beautiful comparative study, but it is not, shallow. Sometimes what happens that we compare two things and we talk about our, whatever we like, we are resonating with, and we appreciate in a very different way. But you interview whole concept in such a beautiful way that it gives very beautiful concept that what kind of sculpture we had in India, and how it communicates the divinity within us through sculpture. So amazing way of presenting, and that comparison help in understanding the sculpture other places, as well as it gives very, it is kind of flashlight giving to our own sculpture tradition. So beautiful. Thank you, Pranjal. Thank you for coming here. Anybody is interested? Asha.
Thank you.
Yeah, Janvi's. Janvi is I've known Janvi for many years now. She's a teacher in Gujarat, but she's very interested in art. So I'm very happy to see teachers who are not necessarily art teachers, but taking deep interest in bringing some kind of aesthetic exposure to their students. I think one of the things that really stood out in your presentation, Pranjal, was the idea that Sri Aurobindo says in so many ways throughout his writings on Indian art in particular, is that to appreciate Indian art, we need not only know the skill, the outer form of creating art, but a very deep sensitivity to cultural truths and way to look at culture is also needed. So that cultural training becomes so important to appreciate any art. And as Kiranji was saying, you certainly have that sensitivity to even this Greco art, the Hellenic art, the best of the West, Western sculptural tradition. So that came out very clearly. So you'd helped us appreciate that as well. So I really appreciate that part. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Also, there is something that, when a Western person has to see the art which is in West, they have to know the mythology. But somehow I feel when we have to see Indian art, it is not mythology so much, it is the philosophy behind it, it's the concept of what is Godhead. And that can help you travel into the aesthetics of what the sculpture reflects, what, how the execution can represent the spirit. Because the philosophy is such an important part of our sculpture that, anyone who is so-called uneducated also knows that, the whole sense of or the whole concept of rebirth is it comes very easy to us. You ask somebody who's on the road whom you think, or somebody would think is not educated, has never been to the formal education. For him, karma, rebirth, God, everything comes so easily. He doesn't have to give a second thought to it. And that is why even that person can appreciate Indian art. You don't have to go through a systematic study of art appreciation, because people take up such courses. But for Indian sculpture, you don't have to take that art appreciation course. All you need to do is be well imbibed into this culture, and it will come automatically. It brings an experience between you and the sculpture. It connects them.
Yeah, very true, very well said. Yes,
I think this is very good note to end this session.
yes.
Thank you, Pranjalji. It's lovely.
Thank you,
Thank
Kiranji.
you so much. So we'll meet next Wednesday.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Thank you, everyone.